Hello and welcome to our very first interview in what will be a series of interviews discussing banking, technology, and the impact of the two industries on the economy and society. My name is Mang-Git Ng, founder and CEO of Anvil, and today I have the pleasure of hosting Mark Gabriel, the Chief Fintech Strategy Officer of Minneapolis-based Sunrise Banks. Welcome, Mark.
Well, hello, Mang-Git. Good to be here with you today. And I'm sorry to even bring this out right away, but we are St. Paul based. There's a huge rivalry between St. Paul and Minneapolis. And I got to make sure we are just blocks in St. Paul. I'm a St. Paul guy, so St. Paul based Sunrise Banks. Happy to be here today.
I apologize for that. St. Paul. Everybody hear that. St. Paul-based Sunrise Banks. Um, cool. Well, Mark, I would love for you to start by introducing Sunrise Banks and maybe speaking a little bit about your role and what you do at Sunrise.
Yeah, absolutely. As we established on the front end, we are a community bank located in St. Paul, Minnesota. We have 6 branch locations here in St. Paul and Minneapolis. And from those 6 brick and mortar locations, look like any other traditional bank in the community. And about 12 years ago, our owner, David Reiling, started looking for other ways to engage in the marketplace. And he settled on prepaid debit card BIN sponsorship. And it was a great opportunity to diversify the balance sheet, but more importantly, to grow our mission because Sunrise Banks is really focused on, at the time, it was on the un and underbanked, but we are a social enterprise that just happens to be a bank. And getting into prepaid really let us really go after the challenge of getting people into the banking industry, just given the lower threshold to get into a prepaid debit card. So really loved it from the mission perspective. And then 2-3 years ago, started to get requests from fintechs looking for bank sponsorship. So the bank pivoted once again. Our mission has changed a little bit to empowering financial wellness. And it's just been a great place to work.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I know Sunrise Bank is a B corporation, so certainly live up to the B corporation status, which is really cool. And tell me a little bit about your role. So you are Chief Fintech Strategy Officer. What does that title mean, and what do you look for, and what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it changes on a day-to-day basis. I tell you, it's really a pretty exciting role here at Sunrise. First and foremost, I'm talking to fintechs that are looking for bank sponsorships and trying to figure out how the bank can serve them as a sponsor bank. And in that role, it's a lot of looking internally as much as it
Hmm.
is externally and trying to figure out what key capabilities need to change and how we as a bank need to evolve and serve this new, it's relatively new area of banking.
Got it. Cool. Has there been anything on the horizon that you've been looking at that's been super exciting that you're excited about?
Oh, tons of stuff. Tons of stuff. It's a pretty interesting world out there, as you well know, as deep as you are in fintech. I think as we look at the space, what we like most about fintech is how it allows us to expand on our mission.
Hmm.
We are,
Yeah.
as you said at the front end, a certified B corporation. We're also a community development financial institution, a CDFI, meaning
Hmm.
60% of all of our loans go to low to moderate income neighborhoods. And we're also a member of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. And so when we talk about mission, um, we really like the fintech space because it so often is trying to solve these unique challenges that the banking industry has kind of either forgotten or these niches that aren't served. And fintech have a great way of understanding what customers need and how to present that information to them in a meaningful way at a time when it's relevant so that they
Hmm.
can solve their problems. So we just love fintech because it is so mission aligned.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one question that immediately comes to mind for me is with fintechs and especially technology companies, there's a specific perspective. So I come from the technology side, so I understand that perspective of banking and how we think banking works from the outside. And then you are coming from the inside of a bank. You are actually in the day to day, the nitty gritty of running a bank. And as Anvil has kind of like started working in the banking industry, we found that there's definitely a misalignment in terms of understanding from both sides. And so, how do you view the marriage of the two industries, and what what do you do, or what kind of suggestions do you have in terms of fintechs that are approaching Sunrise? And what have you learned from Sunrise approaching
Yeah.
fintechs?
Yeah, and it's really changed too, hasn't it? Like when fintech first kind of was getting all of its notoriety, the
Hmm.
concept we heard quite often fintech say, "Well, I'm just going to buy a bank, run the bank, and do all of my products through that."
Mm.
And thankfully, they realized that's a really tough endeavor.
Yeah.
It's really a different space because of its regulation and
Hmm.
some of its limitations that it has, just to keep banks solvent. The regulation really slows things down, and so there has been a little bit of a uh, pressure between the two, a little bit of contention. But I think we're finding that one, fintech is evolving. First of all, they no longer want to come in and just buy up all the charters and think they can run a bank. They realize that
Hmm.
banks play an important role when it comes to compliance and some of the more important, nitty gritty elements of the business model. And so now fintechs are really coming to the table seeking partnerships, and
Hmm.
banks, those that are responding to the space, are really starting from that as well. And so if we both go into it with the concept of this is a long term relationship, and we each have a role to play, and that fintechs are really well positioned to provide great customer experiences, no question about it. They have the tech, but more importantly, they have the data, and they have this very deep understanding of what their customers want and what their customers' problems are. Right? Go back to the old standards of a business model canvas. Fintechs understand the problem inherently. The problem isn't that they need another checking account, right? It's that they need a debit account at a certain time of their product life cycle.
Right.
And fintechs are just really good at sussing out what that product is. On the flip side, banks really have an obligation to understand that the product is being clearly communicated to the customer, that they're
Mm.
not surprised by fees and things of that nature, and that everything is regulatorily compliant. I always like to say that you never hear about the tech that's causing trouble with a fintech partnership. It's usually when they mess up on the banking regulation side that causes trouble. And
Right.
so I think fintechs are starting to realize that banks do play an important role in the relationship, and they look to us to lead with compliance.
Got it. So it sounds like, banking, there's a lot of risks and pitfalls, and having a good partner can really help you navigate those risks and pitfalls. Um, Delving a little bit deeper into this question, I think, and I know you mentioned that fintechs have great customer experience. And one thing, that I would like to note is like fintechs have great digital customer experience if they've done a good job designing their product. But I know community banks, particularly, are really focused on the community, and they are serving. They view themselves as serving the community that they're in. So, can you talk a little bit about the customer experience, the client experience that you believe banks provide in their local community, and how that can translate into better design digital experiences? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting space, and fintech really has a couple of different ways that banks can leverage fintech. Sorry, there's a couple different ways that banks can leverage fintech. And first and foremost, like any other business, we go direct to our consumers. And in our consumer
Mhm.
market, we want to have a digital first environment that is user friendly. And I think now, just given all of the challenges of COVID, it's
Mhm.
hypercritical. I think we've all come to realize how important a digital experience is, because our branch locations, they're open, but there is some hesitance from the general public to go into them.
Mhm.
And so, as a community bank, we want to have those best in breed digital experiences. And fintechs are a great solution set for that. They can help us open accounts online um, with an identification, right? That's a different experience than we're used to, where we like to do business across the desk in a community bank setting.
Mhm.
We're starting as a community bank, we're starting to realize that there's a lot of value to meeting people here on Zooms and on the web. And so I think PPP, the payroll protection program, which is how we met, you were such an instrumental part in our solution, um, really expressed to banks how important it is to have experience. We
Hmm.
really, prior to having a digital onboarding process for small business loans, it was a very manual, face to face, intentionally face to face experience. And then when
Yeah.
the PPP program hit, it became this really big desire for everyone was looking for help, right?
Yep.
And community banks played a particular role in that. And so um, that showed us just how powerful these digital experiences are and that we can actually pivot and make changes and change our environment to be able to bring customers into the bank through those channels.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that was yeah, really. I
I
think
mean,
a pivotal point.
I would love to talk a little bit more about the PPP. I think one thing that we all know and was widely reported is that the PPP was pretty hard to get your hands on, especially in the first round. A lot of banks were just not open to clients that didn't already have a banking relationship with the bank, and we all know that this disproportionately impacted smaller businesses, Main Street businesses, businesses of color. So I think that one thing that really stood out to me with Sunrise's mission and Sunrise's community service is that you guys did open up your application to other people, to people that were not existing clients. And can you walk me through a little bit of the thought process there and um, knowing that other banks were not doing this as well? What drove you guys to open up your application process?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. And it was really it was pretty easy for us to get the loans out to the mindset wise. It was easy for us to realize that our customers needed these loans, right? And we had a
Yeah.
very real need. Phones were ringing very quickly. And so we immediately saw that need and stepped up. And then we started to hear these challenges from outside of our what they call trade area that banks are typically lending in. We
Hmm.
started to hear the challenges that people were facing, and we have a tech stack that allowed us to open this up a little bit wider than other traditional community banks our size are able to do. And so we opened it up, slowly in waves and expanded our area. And really proud to announce that we lent over $216 million worth of PPP loans. And a
Wow.
vast
That's
majority of those, well, actually, half of those roughly went to businesses of $25,000 or less. The amount of the loan was $25,000 or less. And so,
wow.
really hyper focused on those small businesses.
Yeah.
And $44 million was dispersed to nonprofits as well. And so
Wow.
very much a part of community building, but realizing that this was a nationwide need and that we had a
Hmm.
role as a nationwide bank to be able to distribute some of those funds. It was really easy for us to get behind the mindset of expanding our trade area. And luckily, we had a great technology department to help us get there. We had help from fintechs like yourself at Anvil. Um, and we really created a solution that was digital first. Um,
Yep.
yeah, it was really pretty amazing.
Absolutely. I will say it has been a pleasure working with Sunrise Banks through and through. So really enjoyed that. You mentioned something really interesting, which is the trade area that of banking and community banks. They typically are pretty restricted in terms of geography, right? Every community has their own bank. They don't really participate on a national level. Do you see fintechs as a way for community banks to start competing on a national level, maybe with the larger banks, or even just be finding your own niche that would allow you to compete in those national levels?
Absolutely, and I like to say we're kind of a two-headed dragon here at Sunrise, with our brick and mortar locations, which is typically hyper local in the way that it sees the world, and then the
Hmm.
side of the house that I'm on, the fintech partnerships house side of the house. Whereas fintech is a national endeavor, right? We've been a
Hmm.
national sponsor of prepaid, and now fintech is definitely national, but we're also finding it to be more of a global stage than ever before. And
Yeah.
banks kind of in the gritty kind of details of banks. Some have a state charter that kind of limits their ability to serve, and then others like us have a national charter, which gives us a little bit more latitude to spread out across the country. So
Right.
regulation has played a role in some of that, but I think we're seeing that even kind of evolving. You're seeing regulators like the OCC, our regulator, talk about responsible innovation, and banks are being looked at as a part of the solution for getting these things out. So when we look at the landscape, it's definitely
Hmm.
a national landscape. We know that fintechs, um, technology providers really want to serve their consumers, uh, um, not just nationally, but on a global scale. It's really amazing how quickly this landscape has gone from hyper local to national to global.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually really set up the next question really nicely here. So this is great. So I guess you've described this transition from local to national to even global. So I guess how do you see this technology, fintechs and banking, working together to ensure that both industries thrive over the next 50 years, 100 years? What are you looking for on a
Yeah,
regular basis?
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but yeah,
No.
50 years is such a long time, right? And but I walked in this morning. I'm actually in the holding the main office here at the bank, a holding company, and
Hmm.
there's a sign right at the front door with our history. We got like this history wall, and the charter itself, the actual bank that I work for, is over 100 years old. And I just think about the transformations that occurred from that first transaction 100 years ago. Just think what that was
Yeah.
like, right? To now, what will that look like 100 years from now? Boy, I have no idea how different those would be night and day. But we
Yep.
do know that it'll be hyper, be driven by technology. There's no question about that. And I believe that in the last 100 years, we played a role of providing trust. We're a trusted advisor.
Hmm.
And we also play the role of making sure that the transaction is safe. And that was really proven out in the Great Depression and
Yep.
reinforced through the regulation, of course. But I think that as we look at our role in the next 100 years, it's really to be the broker to the regulation as long as it's relevant. And then
Hmm.
to figure out what partnerships provide the best technology for the time that we're in, right? We
Hmm.
don't know what's going to be relevant in 10 years, but we definitely have to start making plans to have a back room and the agile nature within the organization to be able to adapt to that. So, um, yeah, tech's going to be huge, but I think mindset is just as big.
Absolutely. I mean, there were definitely really cool inventions along the way in even the 100-year history, right? Double
Right.
entry accounting to, I mean, everybody was talking about blockchain, a year ago, but
Yeah.
and speaking with bankers today, I actually don't hear it that often or as often as I would imagine. Um, there is a lot of talk about like technologies like AI, RPA. Um, and so I guess my question to you around that would be really, uh, what are some things you've seen implemented well? What are some things you've seen implemented poorly? And like, what are the pitfalls? How do you kind of make the decision as to which fintech to work with, and what are the technologies you want to adopt at the
Yeah,
bank?
that's a tough question. I think the biggest thing for us, just being so focused on mission, the very first
Hmm.
thing we try to figure out is where is this counterparty in terms of our mission? Are they aligned? Do we see the world in the same way? Do we see us as, businesses have a role and they should be good, right? They should do good. Businesses can be a force for good. And when we partner with somebody, it's really on mission alignment, number one. Everything
Hmm.
after that really are details. We offer a commodity at the end of the day, a checking account, a debit account. Those things have some core technologies that need to make them run, but it's the fintechs that really can find unique ways to leverage information that presents it at the right time. And so I think you're going to see a continued need for partnerships. Um, so what has been I think as you talk about blockchain, there was so much hype about that, right?
Yep.
But I think the distributed ledger really hasn't come to its own yet. I do think
Hmm.
there's some incredible stories that will come out of that technology, especially not just in the US, but I think really in developing countries as well. And as
Yeah.
we start to become more of a digital um, economy and a digitally driven nation, I think that distributed ledger just hasn't, the use case hasn't been there yet. But I think it will be one of those technologies that is revolutionary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're still very much in the early phases of understanding these technologies. I know AI has been talked about a lot, but I think even computer scientists are wondering what is this AI actually doing? You know,
Right.
they're unable to explain it. So
That's the
I think
problem in
that's
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was going to say, I think that's a huge problem in regulation, right?
Yeah,
Especially when you're trying to adhere to fair lending practices
right.
and adhere to your mission as a community bank. If you're unable to explain the decision, uh, I feel like that's a huge pitfall or it's a huge opportunity for somebody to come in and really create uh, some technology that can be explained. But
Yeah.
until we get to that point, I think it's unfortunately a hurdle that's just insurmountable.
Yeah, it really
um,
is. And as we look at AI, there's so many ways to leverage that technology as well. But one of the areas that we thought and still think there's a lot of promise for is, we have an obligation to review all of the marketing materials that our fintechs put out.
mhm.
And working in a digital channel, they're very prolific in creating that content. So we'd love to have this,
Yeah,
encourage AI to help us in that endeavor. But some of the nuances of the way we put our human language together, just as is
yeah,
AI is just not there yet, right? It
right,
can go through and it can flag keywords and it can do a really good job, but it can't do the full job.
right.
And some of those things are inflection points for scale. So as we look at AI, it's an incredible technology. Needs a lot of data to make the models smart. As we can
Hmm.
start to look at the industry to bring some of those models, that helps definitely, but still a little bit of growth to occur there before we're using it fully until we can fully embrace it for lending and things like that. But it is an amazing technology.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing, kind of moving a little bit off of AI, moving to AI adjacent now.
All
But I
right.
would love to talk a little bit about the your thoughts on maybe like the labor impact of technology. I know banking employs a lot of people in our country, and especially in this election cycle, there was a lot of talk about UBI, right? Universal Basic Income, supporting workers in as we transition to a new digital economy. Would just love your thoughts on the digitization of your industry specifically, how you feel the impact of the digitization will have on banking, on the workers, on people and society in general. We'd just love to get your 2 cents there.
Yeah, that's a great question. As we look at digitization, maybe first from the economy, right? It's
Yeah.
interesting to see like how the taxi industry, those medallions were such a valued asset for the taxi driver, and now
Hmm.
they really have limited value, and you really need regulation to step in and help it maintain its value. So
Right.
interesting how tech has really displaced the value of that. I think as we go upstream into my area, we're certainly seeing some of those challenges as well. And I think the very first wave is going to maybe not eliminate jobs, but elevate jobs. We have a
Hmm.
lot of people today employed that are looking at transaction monitoring. As I mentioned earlier, they're looking at marketing. So, how will technology lift what they do and take care of some of the nitty gritty of that and really
Hmm.
elevate their ability to do thorough investigation? So, I think the first round, and we're seeing that already, the first round is elevating the jobs. And maybe we
Right.
don't backfill as many, um, as a general, but I think there is the day where the tech can run the stack, and then what does happen, right? As a society, it's not just a banking problem,
Right.
and it's been very interesting to see as part of the COVID relief and the checks that went out on the very front end of that. I don't know if you saw the article a few days ago in the New York Times just about the effect that those payments had to the ability for people to save. We know that Americans have
Right.
traditionally had a hard time saving money. And then COVID relief came out, and we saw for the first time in a long time where Americans were actually starting to save money. Now, how do you balance all that out? I mean, that's a great one, and I
Yeah.
think it's just interesting to. It will be certainly a lot of pressure on our economy and our industry as those technologies roll out in the next. It's I was going to say next decade, but it's probably a shorter time frame than that, right?
I mean, I feel like COVID has definitely accelerated the time frame of
Right.
digital adoption,
Yeah.
especially within banking. And I love the point you mentioned about how, it elevates jobs, and elevates the role that people play within the banking industry, and hopefully that also means you can serve more clients better.
Right.
Uh, and so, like you said, on the one hand, it might mean that the system will eventually be able to run itself, but that also, on the other hand, you also have the ability to serve your community, your wider community, um, in a more geographically distributed way, let's say. So I think it's hard. It's hard to balance which one, or the impact of either side, and where it kind of like nets out. But I'm an optimist and also a technologist, so I think I definitely err on the side of the technology will change the status quo for sure, and it always has. But uh, generally speaking, in the arc of history, I feel like technology has definitely helped society and humans, progress. So I'm looking forward to the next decade, next 50 years, next 100 years, if I'm so lucky to be around in 100 years from now. But yeah, I'm excited.
Well, technology might help us all see the next 100 years, right, in person.
Maybe.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. No, I look at the future and I have optimism as well. It's easy to get into the
Yeah.
dystopian future, and
Yep.
those are always the best movies, quite frankly. But I think, yeah, in the long arc of things, the world is getting wealthier. People are, we're starting to advance towards feeding the entire world. We do have some challenges like global warming and just
Hmm.
a humongous rift between rich and poor that we're still struggling to figure out, right? So there's going to be,
Yeah.
I think there's some big social challenges, but technology is certainly an answer more than it is a detriment to it.
I think so. Cool. And then I guess one final question, as we're on this topic of technology and the answer, maybe not all of the answers, but at least some of the answers. What challenges are banks facing today that, no one is solving, whether it's a fintech or other banks or regulators? Like what is the biggest challenge you see that you would love to have a solution for? They can bring to the CEO tomorrow and be like, I got it. What would that be?
Well, I don't know that banking has the answer to this problem, but I do think there's a big divide between those that have and those that don't. Banking
Hmm.
certainly has a role to play in that, but I do think that there's a broader, solutions. I'm really a systems design kind of guy that thinks that I have a role as a financial institution. Fintechs have a
Hmm.
role to bring some tech. There's probably a role that can be played by the insurance companies. It's no one party that comes to the table with the solution. And
Yeah.
so I guess if I could wave my magic wand, it would be how do we get broader participation across industry to solve global warming or to solve racial inequities or to solve even economic disparities. I think that's really where the magic happens is when you get multiple organizations together just to work in
Hmm.
a common goal. So if we could just figure that out, that would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you heard it from Mark, everybody. It is for everybody to work together and get more participation in the industry and in society as a whole. So thank you very much. I really appreciated the conversation today. Definitely touched on a lot of very interesting topics that are top of mind for a lot of people, I would say. And I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Awesome. Thank you.